What's up, guys, and welcome to the Rebalance podcast, where we dive into topics that matter most when it comes to overcoming struggles, injuries, and finding balance in your life. Everybody's idea of balance is that bit different, so my goal is to give you different perspectives, practical tips, as well as expert insights into what it means to live a balanced life. My name is Robbie Cassidy. I'm a physiotherapist and a health coach, and I've been helping people reignite their love for challenge, overcome their fear, and find more balance in their life through the process of self-development. So, let's get into it. What's up, guys, and welcome back to the podcast. In this episode of the podcast, we're going to look at something. It's a common issue. It's something that a lot of people do after injury, and I want to talk through some of the myths and misconceptions around it. And what we're going to talk about is icing, because, well, I'll talk about why it came to mind. Basically, a friend of mine was talking to me during the week or asking me questions about what to do after an ankle injury, but is putting ice on an injury really the best thing to do? That's the goal of this podcast. And we're going to dive into the science of inflammation and why what you thought and what you've been told before might actually not be the best option, as well as why. So as I said, I was talking to a friend during the week and he asked me about the best course of action after an ankle injury. One of his players sprained an ankle pretty bad and he needed to be back for the next game, and it was 2 weeks later. The next game was a couple of weeks after. So you need to look at how you can accelerate that, and what you need to do is look at function and how you can improve function. And he was saying, okay, so he's already started icing the injury, he's resting it, he's elevating it. What's the next best thing to do? And I wrote back to him, I was like, okay, that's grand. If he has it done, that's all right, but it's not something that I would be very keen on doing. I'd actually tell people not to ice, especially like ankle injuries. I push that. I think that icing it's going to slow it down, and there's better things that you can be doing for it. And I'll talk you through the research on why I think that way as well. So it's funny how it is still a thing. Even though we know that icing now, the research has shown that it actually can delay healing slightly as opposed to speed it up. But it's still pushed consistently, and it's become standard practice. If you sprain an ankle, I guarantee you the first thing someone will say to you is rest that, ice it, and if they feel that they have a good understanding of it, or ice for 20 minutes, take 10 to 15 minutes off and do that 2 to 3 times an hour for the next day. And then they'll say, and then take it off in the evening and then start again tomorrow. It's because it's what's taught in first aid, and it's what, I don't know why it's still there, but anyway, it is. Now, it is still standard practice, but this episode of the podcast is going to be a good reason why we need to test, and we need to really look at what standard practice is now, because as our understanding evolves, we need to then look to change. Now, I understand the other thing is that you don't want to be changing things too fast, because with the speed that research is coming out, you'd be chopping and changing everything, and you would never really know what's the best option or the best course. So it's nice to have something there, and then when it's disproven, change it. But when it comes to icing, I think it's probably time that we changed it. So let's look at the RICE protocol first and who came out with it. So the RICE protocol is a rest, ice, compress, and elevate. And now there's a new one. It's the police. So it's protect, optimally load, and then you go into BOL, ice, compress, and elevate. So that's the new idea. But at the same time, the only nice one that I think that they've thrown in there is the idea of optimal loading. That's a good idea, and that's why I'll talk through why that's a good idea as well. But the rest of it is not as effective. Now, as I said, let's look at the RICE protocol specifically. Who invented it? The guy that invented it, his name is Dr. Gabe Mirkin. He was an athletic therapist at the time he invented it, and now he is a doctor. And the funny thing is that he admitted that he made it up. He made up the RICE protocol because of what he thought would have been the best idea for it. And the thing is, because he was writing a book, Sports Medicine, in 1978, and he said, this seems like it could work, because you're resting it, obviously you're after injuring it, icing it. The reason that say icing works is because it reduces inflammation. That was the idea, reduces swelling, and it also feels good. Compressing, so again, reduce that inflammation, and elevate to help to drain the fluid when it happens. So that's, even in a basic level, it actually sounds pretty smart. Like, it sounds like that could work. On a physiological level, there's a reason that the body goes through this idea. And I think the thing is that it's funny that we pick out something. We're very good at doing this as well as people. pick out one thing and then say that's going to be the fix for everything. I know you're going to know, if anyone has listened to this podcast long enough, a very simple one is they say back pain is mechanically generated because we bend down and we have back pain when it has nothing to do with it at all. That's another episode in itself. It's funny the way we pick something and we just take this reductionist idea around it and then we really minimize, like get rid of everything else and say this is the main issue. So they were looking at it and saying, okay, well, if it swells up after and we know when it's healed there's no swelling, that means if we get rid of the swelling faster, we will be able to heal it faster. So that was the idea behind reducing inflammation. But the thing is, the guy that made it, this Dr. Gabe Mirkin, has since come out and spoken against the protocol and said, although it may delay swelling and reduce pain, it actually delays the natural healing response of the body through vasoconstriction. And then he also came out and said, through a summary of 22 papers, found there was no evidence that ice improved healing. Now, I have to give credit for that, because to have a protocol that is used worldwide and it's because of you, and it's like you've invented this protocol, it's used worldwide. A lot of people, they sit on that and then they really just, that's what they go for. They say, okay, I'm just going to go balls to the wall here and just stick to that. I have to give him credit for coming out afterwards and saying, no, this is not as effective as we thought it was, and there's better ways of doing it. That takes a lot, and that's what the scientific process is about. So I think a lot of people could take from that. That's excellent from him, Dr. Gabe Mirkin. I really, I appreciate that in science, when even when they have come out with something, even when it has been proven wrong, or not the best way or most optimal way, they come out and they say that, while other people would just stick to their guns. So let's look at it in a bit more detail. Why is it that ice is not the most effective thing? Well, inflammation first, like what is it? Inflammation is the body's way of reacting to harm. So it's like when you have an infection or an injury, and it's an immune response. So when we think of inflammation, we often see it as bad because it's linked to many diseases, and chronic diseases specifically, and even cancers. Now that's chronic inflammation. But when we're looking at injuries, that's acute inflammation. It comes up and then it goes down. When you're looking at chronic inflammation, like let's say IBS, inflammatory bowel syndrome, where it's in the body and it's there all the time, that's a bigger problem, and that's more related to stress in a lot of ways. And then when you have consistent stress in the body, is stuck in that fight or flight, and you have a lot of inflammation, that causes breakdown. Inflammation is actually really good for us because it helps our body to respond to an infection, and it helps it to heal an injury. And without it, our body wouldn't really be able to repair it, because of the, let's say, the cells that are involved in it are really important in improving healing, really important in healing overall, in the healing process, let's say. Now, so I was looking through some of the research and I came up on this paper, Shaw Zoud, 2020, and the paper is basically inflammation, skeletal muscle regeneration, and it's called Leave It to the Macrophages. Okay, if anyone wants to read it, it's grand. Jump on Sci-Hub, stick it in, you'll get it. But it's not the most enjoyable read for sure, but it does go into detail on it. But it's there's definitely nicer things to read. So in a basic way, in a simple way, it's how does it work? When tissues get injured or infected, the body's immune response kicks up and it sends cells that are macrophages to the area. And at first, what they do is they're really strong, they act to protect it, and they clear out all the debris. And then once the danger in that is kind of cleared out, then they actually change their function and they start to calm down, and then they kick off the healing process. The most basic way to describe it, but that's what it is. Okay, very basic way of describing it. I'm sure there'll be some biologists here, they will come after me and say there's way more detail to that, but that's all we need to know right now. Why do we need it? In the event of an infection or tissue damage, because think about it, both are going to require a immune response. When our immune system sends us inflammatory cells to the site, the response is the same. It's going to be the same. The injured tissue gets an influx of these cells, they kickstart the healing process, and then they calm down, they change over, or they clear it out, I should say, and they change over and they really start to work on it. And it is those macrophages that make the biggest difference. It's a type of inflammatory cell. Now, what they do is they release a hormone. called insulin-like growth factor. Now stick with me because I will tell you why this is important to know. And this IGF-1, which you may have heard before, it helps in healing the muscles and the other injured areas. Now, when you apply ice to an area, what that does is it vasoconstricts everything. So vasoconstriction is when the blood vessels get smaller to reduce the amount of blood flow that goes to an area. When you put ice on an area, it does it so it doesn't lose body heat. That's the one of the simplest reasons that we would vasoconstrict. When you exercise, we vasodilate, we can bring more blood to an area, and we can get more oxygen and everything that we need there at the time. So when you put ice on this, it's going to slow down the healing because it prevents the body from really releasing this IGF-1, this insulin growth factor 1. And when they looked at a study of basically two groups of mice, one group was genetically altered to have the muted that immune response to injury. The other one had a normal response, and the muscles were intentionally, then they were damaged with a barium chloride. Okay, for those who know what that is. The result basically was that the mice with the muted immune response, they didn't actually heal because they weren't getting these levels of IGF-1. But the normal mice healed much quicker because they showed extremely high levels of IGF-1 in the muscle after the injury. When we understand that that IGF-1 has a significant effect on the healing process. So if we're delaying the response of that IGF-1 by putting ice and by vasoconstricting the area and reducing blood flow to the area, it's going to delay the healing long term. And as I said, there was no study that showed that it actually had an effect on the healing process, a long-term effect, I'd say, to improve it.
What's up, guys? Robbie here. I hope you are enjoying the podcast so far. I want to take a moment just to personally ask you for your help. If you're enjoying the podcast, would you be willing to share it with someone you think would love it too? Maybe a friend, family member on social media, or even if you just brought it up in conversation with someone you know. The recommendation means the world to us, and it's because of people like you that we get to be able to produce this podcast on a weekly basis. So thank you so much for your support so far, and I would love if you could help us reach even more people who could benefit from it too. Really appreciate you, and we're going to jump straight back to the podcast.
And so once we understand that, and once we understand that it's going to vasoconstrict, thing is, once they do constrict, it takes quite a while for them to open again because the body isn't too keen on losing energy for no reason. So it's not just going to let everything back when it feels like it's good again. It's going to take that bit of time to open up and to let that blood flow into the area. So we're going to have that damaged area, it's going to stay damaged for a lot longer. And yeah, the healing process doesn't kick off straight away. Now the same idea, this is the interesting thing. So the same idea can still be applied for anything that restricts blood flow to an area. So when you look at cortisone type drugs or even cortisone injections, that's why you can only get so many of them because they start to break down the area after a while. The other thing is that non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen is the exact same. It's crazy to think that the first response for a lot of things are now being disproven and shown that, okay, it's reducing inflammation, it's reducing swelling, but we know now that we need that swelling. We need it there, we need it to pass through, okay? If it doesn't, and it slows down the release of that IGF-1, then it's going to delay the healing process overall. So things like ibuprofen, even though before they were like painkillers and they thought that it was a good idea, now it's not a good idea, and now it's something that we need to move away from and start to work into other things. And now I will talk about what we should do after this, so don't worry, but I really want to get this point across because I do get this question a lot where people say, do I ice it? What do I do? And I want to just make sure it's cleared up. The other thing is a lot of immune suppressants that are often used to treat arthritis, cancer, psoriasis, they're obviously going to restrict blood flow as well. With arthritis, I think it's an important one to note because with that, you'll have arthritis in a joint where it's just degeneration in a joint, a breakdown, wear and tear. That happens with age anyway. And instead of taking things to try reduce the inflammation, we should look at rebuilding the structure, improving the amount of synovial fluid, and improving the structure of the joint altogether and the function of the joint.
as opposed to trying to take things to make that, or to try to reduce those inflammatory effects. Okay, so really important to work on strength, try to build up your exercise activity, make sure that your recovery methods are right when you're looking at something like arthritis. The other thing is like applying cold packs and applying ice and anything else that's going to block your immune response to injury. Interesting one on this is when you take that into account, where does ice baths come into the recovery side of things? Now, when you know that ice is going to cause vasoconstriction, reduce blood flow, are ice baths actually a good idea for recovery? There's a lot of benefits to ice baths, and I think a lot of that comes from like the mental benefits of being able to put yourself in there. I've seen other things that increases your HGH, and I've seen that increase your testosterone and all these other factors. But really, in my opinion, I think a lot of the benefit of an ice bath, especially for me anyway, is the mental benefits as opposed to the physical benefits. You feel better, obviously, yeah, but the mental fortitude it takes to go in and stick it out is a lot more important, I think, for people. So in conclusion, I'm going to just talk through everything really quickly. In conclusion, what's inflammation's role and why is it important? Inflammation is the body's natural response to injury or infections, and it needs to be controlled because if it goes on too long, we have this chronic inflammation, it can be harmful, but it still needs to happen. We can't just cut it off completely. So you need to proper resolution is going to ensure that the tissues will heal and they will return to normal in good time. Now, that doesn't mean that we stop it altogether. We still need it. That's so important. These macrophages, immune cells, they initially fight and clear out the harmful agents that are in it, and they're very aggressive towards that. And then later they transition, into a state that promotes healing and reduces inflammation within that area. So that's why, I hope you're getting a better understanding of it. That's why people say, okay, well, the inflammation's gone, so that's what we need to try to do as fast as possible. But you need it first to clear everything out, and then afterwards for that. And for anyone who doesn't know, well, I'll talk about it in a minute, the inflammation phase in an injury is around about 1 to 2 days. Is what it takes, about 48 hours for that phase to pass through before you go on to your proliferation phase after that. So once we understand that, then it's about clearing up the dead cells. As I said, during inflammation, some cells are going to die. Body clears these up through the process called E. This is me taking words now from that paper because I wanted to try and get a good, a deeper understanding for those who wanted that. I don't even know how I'm going to pronounce this word. Epherocytosis. And that's going to aid in the transition to healing. The muscle healing is then precise. It's a precise process, and disturbances can affect repair. As you can see when they looked at the mice and how they dampened the IGF-1 response in one of them and the other one, and they found that the healing was much faster in the ones who had the IGF-1 response. So what does this mean? It means that common treatments, just things like ice and non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, ibuprofen, stuff like that, it's not as beneficial as what we once thought. And I know the good thing about this is that we always have to think of these things in cycles. So before we thought it was good and we did all the icing, afterwards now we understand that it's not as effective. We still know that you still need that inflammation phase, and once you move to the healing process, all the better. So how can we I know in a couple of years time the next thing is going to be, well, how can we speed up that initial inflammation phase to clear it out much faster, which I would hopefully talk about in this, and then how then we can get rid of the inflammation so the healing process just kicks off after that. Really important. Everything goes in cycles, especially when you're looking at this research and looking at, especially around medicine and the body. Before it was all mechanical, now it's holistic. Then they're going to refine it more. It's going to go back to mechanical. Then it's going to go back to holistic again, or they might refine a different aspect of it. That's the way it's been working since I've been involved in it for the last 7 or 8 years. So I can imagine it's going to continue on that path. So the overarching takeaway, I guess, is that inflammation is complex, but it's crucial to the process for repair. And understanding that can guide us towards better treatments. If you injure an area and you do loads of extra work that causes loads of extra inflammation on it, that's a problem because that's that chronic inflammation. But if you do nothing at all, that's also an issue. So we need to try find that nice middle ground, and that's what the research is going to be finding. And that were some of the questions that they asked at the end of that study is, what is optimal in that? So to get to the point, what should you do instead when you have an injury of like a joint or a muscular injury? Well, as we know now, is you don't want to just dampen that initial phase completely. The inflammation state phase is around generally 1 to 2 days. So what you should do is that you're looking to promote function. And the easiest way to promote function is doing very light movements. If anyone was following my Instagram, I watched my Instagram during the week where I sprained my toe last week, and I was basically in the first day, second day, I was doing very light movements, just loading it to test it out. And I was able to get back in. Now, it's not 100% just yet. It's only 7 days after it happened now. But I've still been able to train. I was able to train 9 times this week with it. So it couldn't be that. It's not that bad. Okay, obviously with taping and different things and managing how I train and load management and all that goes along with it. Light movements go a long way because it helps to clear that out. It helps to, I guess, let the inflammation phase happen, but it's not over pressuring it. That's really, really important as well. And it's in line with the body's natural healing process. Movement is a great way of healing. Movement is a great way of bringing more blood flow to the area, while at the same time your lymphatic system, I don't know why I paused in the middle of that. Lymphatic system helps to clear out anything that needs to be cleared out. Heavy movements are probably not the best. So doing loads of heavy jumps aren't going to clear up that toe, but doing very light movements, moving it through its range of motion, same thing if you sprain your ankle, moving it through its range of motion, trying to get a bit more function, trying to calm down that pain response and promote function is a great way of clearing it up and a great way of healing it. So you're working always towards getting back to function, and pain will help to dictate that as you go through it. Continue to work around the injury. Don't just stop. Just because you sprained your ankle doesn't mean you stop everything. It just means that you reduce. Like, you sprain your ankle, you're not going to go for a 5K the next day. But that doesn't mean you can't go for like a light walk just to help clear it out. Or get into water and do a bit of swimming so it's moving that bit more. That's important stuff. Like, that stuff is way, way more important than just leaving it, sticking on Netflix, throwing the ankle up, and then letting it sit there. Because that's going to delay the response. It's going to delay our return to sport as well. So focus on what you can do today, and then focus on whatever you do today is going to help you tomorrow. Okay? If you do way, way, way too much today, you're going to feel it tomorrow. But if you do very little today, it's going to be a lot more stiff, a lot more sore tomorrow as well. So we're always trying to find that middle ground that we're working slightly into it, and then pulling back. Work slightly into it, pulling back. And as you get better and better, you'll find it improves faster and faster. And it's a skill. It needs to be learned. It's something that you might not get it right in the first time, but if you're someone who wants to play sports or enjoys the competitive aspect or just enjoys being active and wants to be active for the rest of your life, it's a very good skill to learn, for sure, how to heal and how to rehab the body. So, yeah, that's all from me anyway. No, that's everything I wanted to chat about today. Hopefully I was able to give you a different perspective on it, and a different perspective on why we shouldn't just go for what the standard is of straight away go and ice it, because that's the issue. Or anyone who listens to this podcast long enough, you'll understand that that's what I'm always pushing, is that just because there's a standard there doesn't mean that we have to always apply it. There's a lot of times those standards are outdated, and we need to start looking holistically at all these issues. But that is everything from me today. I hope everyone out there is doing well and healthy. If you have any questions, please send them on to me on Instagram. I always do appreciate when people get on to me on Instagram or send me an email at info@themobilitytutor.com. It helps guide the podcast. It helps me understand what you want to see more of. And it's nice chatting to you people who are listening to the podcast. So I do appreciate you. I really appreciate that you come back every week. And that is all from me right now. Last thing I will say is that anyone, or if you know anyone who's dealing with a back issue at the moment, I would love if you could direct them towards a spine initiative. It's the program I have out now. It's a holistic style program where we look at everything, and we look at basically getting people who are dealing with a back injury or a back issue back to exercise, and specifically back to running a 5K right now, and then hopefully then building them back into high intensity work or gym work, whatever it is afterwards. But I will leave a link below in the bio here, the description, and it's www.spineinitiative.com. That's all for me today, and I will chat to you all again next week. Have a good one. Okay guys, thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're looking to learn more about what we do, as well as check out any of the mobility and rehab programs we have available, just head over to the description of this podcast and you will find a link to all the programs there. As always, thank you for listening, and I will chat to you all again in the next episode. Have a good one.